Good morning. I'm State Representative Beth Moore. I represent House District 95 in Gwinnett and Fulton counties here in the great state of Georgia. Today is September 26th, the day the governor of Georgia has declared to be Mesothelioma Awareness Day. I stand with Senator Sally Harrell in support of our constituents, Rich and Aubrey DeAugustinis, their family, the Insulation Union, and the Georgia Meso community, who you will also hear from today. Why do we need Mesothelioma Awareness Day? Well, if you're anything like me, your only awareness of mesothelioma may come from those late night cable commercials saying, if you or your loved one have been exposed to or suffered from mesothelioma, call this law firm to claim your settlement. Well, that's great, but that message fails to educate the public about the causes, symptoms, and prognosis of what is effectively a human-caused disease. Mesothelioma is a cancer that is highly correlated with exposure to a commercial product called asbestos. Asbestos is a mineral mined out of the ground and is used in products ranging from insulation and shipbuilding to baby powder and cosmetics. The symptoms are difficult to diagnose and may not appear in the patient for 15 to 40 years after exposure to asbestos. But once a diagnosis is made, death is almost always swift and painful. Although the dangers of asbestos have been known for over 100 years, restrictions on it were not implemented by Congress until the 1970s. And it is still being imported into the United States and used in products today. Mesothelioma is not an inevitable part of life, or death for that matter. It is a choice we make as a society. We choose to extract this known carcinogen from the ground. We chose to use it as a cheap building supply, and it's still present today in millions of homes across America in residential and commercial properties built before the 1970s. When the inevitable time comes for those properties to be renovated, torn down, or perhaps destroyed by a natural disaster, millions more Americans will be at risk of exposure to asbestos and to the potential development of this horrible disease. No one knows the horrors of this disease more than the patients and the families that have suffered from it. Their stories, their pain, are the reason we are here today. I would now like to introduce to you Aubrey DeAugustinis to share the proclamation signed by the governor today, declaring September 26th Mesothelioma Awareness Day. Aubrey?
Good morning. I'd like to introduce you to the proclamation for Mesothelioma Awareness Day. Whereas mesothelioma is an aggressive asbestos-related cancer that affects the linings of the lungs, abdomen, and other organs, and whereas the heavy use of asbestos is used in manufacturing, industry, and construction has been recognized as the worst occupational health disaster in United States history, and whereas asbestos was used in the construction of virtually all office buildings, public schools, and homes built before 1975. And whereas a high percentage of those diagnosed with mesothelioma were exposed to asbestos on naval ships and in shipyards. This is now believed to include many of the firefighters, police officers, and rescue workers who worked ground zero in the aftermath of September 11th, 2001. And whereas there is no safe level of asbestos exposure, and whereas, due to the occupational, household, or incidental exposure and the very long latency of this disease, tens of millions of Americans are now at risk for developing mesothelioma, and whereas the available treatments generally have limited effect, and there is a high mortality rate among patients who are diagnosed, and finally, whereas Mesothelioma Awareness Day provides an opportunity to raise public awareness of the disease, including the need to develop effective treatments now, Brian P. Kemp, the governor of the state of Georgia, does hereby proclaim September 26, 2019 as Mesothelioma Awareness Day in Georgia. Thank you.
I would now like to introduce Mr. Rich DeAugustinis to share the story of his and his family's suffering under mesothelioma.
Good morning. I'm standing before you today because my late wife, Tara, cannot. You see, her life was taken from her against her will, one breath at a time. Early in 2016, after coming down with serious and sudden symptoms, we heard the words, "You have mesothelioma." I would come to find out later that hearing those words is effectively a death sentence. We loved and supported her through her battle, getting her the best care available here in Atlanta at Winship Cancer Institute. However, nothing stemmed the tide of mesothelioma overtaking her lungs, and she went home to Jesus on May 23, 2017. Mesothelioma, or meso for short, is one of the rarest, most aggressive, and most painful cancers known to man. Meso is a cancer of the lining of the lungs, chest, abdomen, or heart. What's unusual about it is that it's a man-caused cancer. It's most often caused by exposure to asbestos. That is settled science, not up for debate. Mesothelioma is a problem because asbestos is a problem. Tara was exposed to asbestos as a child through asbestos-tainted baby powder that was used on her as she grew up. As the period between asbestos exposure and the onset of meso symptoms can range from 20 to 50 years, meso didn't rear its ugly head in her life until she was 46 years old. Before meso, Tara was a wife, mother, daughter, friend, business owner, and leader in the community. Asbestos and meso took all of that away from her, breath by breath. Today, there is only one FDA-approved treatment for mesothelioma. That standard of care, which is chemotherapy followed by surgery for those that are capable, and then radiation, generally only extends survival by a nominal 3 months. Tara bravely and fiercely fought this hideous disease head-on in 2016. She endured chemotherapy and then had one of the toughest surgeries possible, the complete removal of her diseased right lung. Following that, she had weeks of radiation to kill the remainder of the mesothelioma in her body. Unfortunately, the mesothelioma had spread into her lymph nodes and to her remaining left lung. In early 2017, the disease went into overdrive and took her life, stealing every last breath that she had. I watched by her side as meso took everything that made Tara who she was: her health, her ability to care for her family, her ability to work and lead, and her capacity to love and serve others. To add insult to injury, meso is one of the most painful cancers known to man. I watched Tara endure tremendous pain and suffering over those 15 months, even as meso stole away her life and her dignity in the process. After Tara went home to Jesus in May 2017, I decided something had to change. This was a preventable tragedy, and I wasn't going to let it continue to happen. Thus began my efforts to fight for meso awareness and against asbestos. You see, asbestos should be a problem of the past. Most Americans think it is, but it's not. According to the Mesothelioma Applied Research Foundation and a number of other organizations, asbestos is still present in millions of homes, government buildings, and schools, and can be found naturally occurring in the environment around us, as Beth duly noted before. Worse yet, there are largely unregulated consumer products, like some cosmetics that are imported into this country, some of which have been found to contain asbestos. Not by intent, but it continues to be a problem. That means that Americans and Georgians are still being exposed to asbestos today in 2019. This is not an issue of yesterday. This remains an issue for us today. It continues to be a problem. No amount of exposure to asbestos is safe, so we must act. So what's the answer? It's pretty simple. Ban asbestos and do it now. Our society made the decision to take it out of the ground decades ago, and it's time to stop. There is legislation to ban asbestos at the federal level, which needs to move forward but is doing so slowly. Given this, we must act at a state level here in Georgia to protect the health of Georgians if the federal government cannot or will not at this time. As I've said before, meso is a death sentence, but it's a preventable tragedy. Only 8% of meso patients survive 5 years post-diagnosis. Tara survived a little over a year. This simply didn't need to happen. The Mesothelioma Applied Research Foundation indicates that 100,000 Americans are expected to die from mesothelioma in the next 40 years. We must act now, or here in the great state of Georgia, hundreds or thousands of more Georgians will face the same painful fate that Tara did. The choice is ours. It's simple. It's an easy choice to make, to stop doing something we know is killing our loved ones. As each of us leave today, I want you to breathe deeply. Take a moment, take a deep breath. Stop and think about how important that is to you as a human being, how you can't do anything at all without breathing. So help me stop asbestos and mesothelioma from taking the breath away from those Georgians that deserve to live. Let's not let Tara's fight be in vain. Ban asbestos in Georgia now. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce Phil Rainwater, who's the business manager for the Insulators Allied Workers Local 48 here in Atlanta.
Thank you, Rich. I want to thank the Governor Kemp today for making September the 26th Mesothelioma Awareness Day. Most of the people in Georgia have no idea what asbestos does or causes when you inhale it or swallow it in your saliva. But I started in the construction industry in 1980 here in the state of Georgia. They just had put a ban on asbestos products in construction then. I watched many of my colleagues that I worked with through the years who actually installed those products pass away from asbestos-related diseases, mainly mesothelioma. Not only did I watch a lot of those pass away, I watched their own spouses and their children pass away from it, from their father or their mother bringing it home on their clothes into the household and actually exposing them, not knowing what it would do to them later in life. Mesothelioma is a terrible disease that has cost many lives. We're in total favor of a total ban on asbestos use in the United States and here in the state of Georgia. Whichever way we can get it started, we're all behind it. The Insulators Union and our international will back any federal register or any asbestos ban going forward from this point. We thank you for that time.
Good morning. I'm Senator Sally Harrell, and the least I can do is be here today to represent and be with these fine people who have suffered at the hand of this disease. But I wish I didn't have to be here at all. But there's more that I can do as a state senator than just be here today. And Representative Beth Moore and myself, we are looking into legislation to address the presence of asbestos in Georgia. As a new legislator, I learned years ago that you don't come to the legislature in Georgia and say, we need to do this because another state like Colorado did it. You will be told immediately that Georgia is not Colorado. That being said, states like New Jersey have passed total bans on the use of asbestos. So going forward this fall, Representative Moore and I will collaborate with the EPD here in Georgia to better understand the asbestos abatement process and ensure that Georgia's compliance with existing statute and regulations. After doing that, we plan to bring legislation forward aimed at reducing or banning asbestos exposure to Georgia residents.
At this point, we would like to gather together those who are attending this press conference and those who are speaking and do a photo on the steps.